It's on? Okay, great. Next up, we have Joe Nickell, Ph.D. Joe is a senior research fellow for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, an international scientific organization, and he is an investigative columnist for Skeptical Inquirer magazine. A former professional stage magician, he was resident magician at the Houdini Magical Hall of Fame for 3 years, and private investigator for a world-famous detective agency. He's become widely known as an investigator of myths and mysteries, frauds and forgeries, and hoaxes. Please, are we ready for him? Okay, come on now. Do you want me to do a dance? Ready?
Keep going.
They're killing me up here. You don't want me to sing. T-shirts. We have a few t-shirts left, by the way. My understanding is we are close to selling out, so if you still want one, get them before they disappear.
T-shirts for the Friday the 13th.
And there are also t-shirts for the Friday the 13th party in the back. Waving hand back there, you can see him waving.
One Joe Nickell book.
And one Joe Nickell book, who's coming up on stage, and I'm sure he'll sign it for you.
Absolutely.
There you go. Also, I hope you all have been checking out our vendors and exhibitors in the hall. They have been good enough to help us out with the conference, and they are all wonderful programs, and I hope that you guys stop by and say hi. Okay, are you done yet? Really? Pat, you're killing me.
There's only 4,000 files to choose from. You have a lot of stuff with that.
Folders. Okay. Well, you probably are a better entertainer than I, so I will turn the stage over to Joe here. Why don't you use this so that Pat can focus on copying the file instead of changing the mic over.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. Let me just say in response to an earlier speaker that I'm a secular humanist. Let me define that for you. That's an atheist with a heart. That's right. Let me just say that when I was a young man, I was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. I went south as a community organizer. I marched with Martin Luther King. I was tear gassed at the Pentagon, lived in exile for 8.5 years as a federal fugitive because of the war in Vietnam. I've been a feminist, a member of the National Organization for Women for many years. I've blogged on gay marriage, for it, of course. And so for me, all those things are part of humanist values. And to leave that out and just tell you what I'm not a theist. Well, that won't happen in my lifetime. Push to the right. Okay, we do need a screen. And this will be better. So. Do I have to point it at the screen?
Nope. Just hold it in your hand. Just wait a second. The projector's warming up.
Okay.
There you go.
Oops, I have to go back too because it missed the first one.
I got you.
Okay. All right, stop there. Well, I'm going to talk about the science of miracles. And one of the major points I want to make is what's called an argument from ignorance. This is where most people go wrong with paranormal. Almost all paranormal claims are based on an argument from ignorance. And it goes like this. We don't know what the bright light in the sky was, therefore it's a flying saucer from Mars. We don't know what the noise was in the old house, therefore it's a ghost. We don't know why Mrs. Jones's cancer went into remission, therefore it's a miracle of the Holy Virgin Mary, and so on. Now, these are arguments from ignorance because it means it's an argument from I don't know. you can't logically say, I don't know, therefore I do know. You get that, right? And yet this is all the paranormal all the time, and it's the same with miracles. Now, as you know, most people's talks are thinly disguised commercials for the books they've written. See, if this doesn't work, my joke doesn't work. Yeah? Yeah.
Other button.
Point it the other way.
Point it over here, Joe.
Point the projector.
Maybe you can.
There we go.
There it is.
Okay, well, my talk is being sabotaged by poltergeists. Anyway, in case you hear Neil deGrasse Tyson use the same opening joke, he stole it from me, but with my permission. If I could have the next slide. Okay. I'm going to just whirlwind through some miracle claims. One of the earliest examples of a guy doing something like me concerns the idol of Bel in the Bible, but it's only in the 14th chapter of Daniel, which is only in Catholic Bibles. But the story is that the Babylonian king Cyrus was taken in by the worship. Can we go back to my slide? Okay. And each day, a quantity of wine and a quantity of food was brought before the idol, and the temple was closed, and the next day the food was gone, so Cyrus said, you see. And Daniel was, in fact, quite provocative about this, and he says, "O king, idols are only made of wood and clay and things like that, and they never ate or drank anything," for which he was almost put to death. But they arranged a test, and so Daniel, before they sealed the temple, sprinkled ashes on the floor. So they put the king's signet on the outside. It's a wonderful skeptical story in chapter 14 of Daniel in Catholic Bibles. And when they opened the temple the next time, all the food and wine were gone. The king said, "See?" And Daniel said, "See?" And they followed the tracks to the secret doors where the priests, having engorged themselves, were hiding. The priests were put to death, for those of you who care about such things. They make some of you happy. I do the best I can. Next slide. In Mexico, the most venerated image, almost in all of Catholicism, is the Holy Virgin of Guadalupe. And this image appeared miraculously on the inside of the cloak of a peasant in 1531. This was just after the conquistadors had conquered the Indians, and the church was very desirous of taking over the native population religiously. This is called syncretism, when you impose one religion on top of another. So they convinced, by using this miracle picture, they convinced the locals that their virgin goddess Tanatzin was actually Holy Virgin Mary. They just sort of got things a little bit wrong, and they built a church to the Virgin Mary on the site where Tanatzin had been worshipped. And this was 10 years after Cortez. So I showed with this forensic drawing many years ago. It's a little pixelated and maybe not the best version of my artwork, but I showed that this was, although no one was allowed to examine it, that you could show that it had, for example, the traditional artistic method of prayer, not the ancient method of prayer, attitude of prayer, that there were all sorts of artistic conventions within the figure, that in photographs where you could enlarge it enough to see the weave pattern of the cloth, you could see that in fact there were opacity, which would indicate brush painting, and so on. I have lived long enough for that to have been examined by an art restorer. And as I predicted, it is rendered in tempera paint. Next slide. Not showing up very well. You could maybe see a sort of a doorway shape and a bright light. Maybe if the lights were a little darker, it would show up. Maybe it's just not a good...
It's the brightness.
It's the brightness.
Try and see if you can get that just a little better, sorry. But these pictures like this were showing up at Marian apparition sites like Medjugorje. And at many of these, people would take a Polaroid one-step camera and aim it at the sun and take a picture. And the resulting picture would look like this. It should look like a doorway with an arched top and bottom. I can't see what you can see there. But believers thought it was the doorway to heaven. It is really rather strange because I had a religious editor who came up to me at one of these sites, recognized me, and said, I don't know what this is, but it's no hoax. People are just honestly taking these pictures, and this is what's happening when they photograph the sun. As it turns out, that doorway shape is not the doorway to heaven. It's the doorway into the camera. The Polaroid one-steps camera aperture has that particular shape. Okay, next slide. Wow, these pictures are not really very good, are they? No, I apologize because I hadn't seen them. They were made for me. This is the grilled cheese Madonna. Let's try the next slide and see if it's a little better. Do you remember this, the holy grilled cheese? Well, some skeptics suggested that this was too good to be true and must have been some sort of altered or fake picture. I assure you that's not true, and skeptics don't do anybody any good when they suggest that people who've seen a lake monster or have been drinking, or that someone who's had some other experience is a liar or a fraud artist, when they don't know what they're talking about. I had custody of this remarkable grilled cheese sandwich, courtesy of Penn and Teller. I had custody of it for a day, and I subjected it to the most careful analysis, and I assure you that it's just a random pattern of skillet burns. I call your attention, again, not a great picture, but you can see that one of the nostrils is actually missing, and your eye fills that in. It's good because you do it. There's an ugly mark on the chin, and you just subtract that right out in your viewing. The ability to do this is called pareidolia, and the image, any image like this, the most famous is the man in the moon. The face on the Mars is another one. Mrs. Rubio's Holy Tortilla in New Mexico, and I was on Oprah once with her daughter, and people laughed at her, and I didn't. A very nice person. But they're called simulacra. Okay, next slide. Okay, well, this curious picture came about because the Toronto Sun newspaper invited me to come to Toronto and investigate a weeping icon. And when I got there, they were lined up as far as you could see and charging admission. Well, I just bypassed the line around in the church, and they shouted at me $2.50, and I shouted back Toronto Sun and went on. It's the nature of my work. And I finally got the priest to pull back a lamp and hold up a candle so I could see it. You see me trying to look over his shoulder, and I thought he looked familiar, but you know, if you've seen one of the guys dressed like that with a long beard, it's very easy to think that the next guy dressed like that with a long beard is the same guy. I don't mean to stereotype anyone, just that they dress in stereotype. And so this is the Greek Orthodox Church. It turns out he was the same priest who had at another church in New York had a weeping icon that I had been involved in. Next slide. Well, as luck would have it, get this now, I was invited by the Greek Church of North America to conduct a special investigation of this icon subsequently. The woman on the right is the attorney for the church, and the gentleman on the left of me is from the Ontario Provincial Police Fraud Squad. I took samples. I was under police guard. There were police outside. There was trouble in the neighborhood. I'm undaunted by such things, of course. And the upshot of this was that, as I had said, it was simply a non-drying oil that had been placed on the eyes. Non-drying oil means like olive oil. If you want your paint to dry, use a drying oil like linseed oil. If you don't want it to ever dry, put olive oil in it. But if you want the tears on a statue, use a non-drying oil. The upshot, though, was that we could never get police warrants because you would have had to have someone there who saw him or saw someone put that on there. However, he did flee. It turned out that this particular priest had been defrocked as a priest in Athens for working in a brothel. I don't make this stuff up because I don't have to. Next slide. And then I was called to Campbell, Ohio, where there were two glowing statues, high up on a bell tower, one of Jesus and one of Mary. Well, they weren't glowing at all. They were simply shining in the sun. And what was shining was you can see here, I think, the bright spots are the halo, the eyes, and the Sacred Heart were shining because they were covered with gold leaf. And so you'd be standing there and you'd hear a man say, "Oh, Martha, it's glowing." And then you'd think, the sun is right, and then the cloud would come over and you'd say, "Oh, Martha, it isn't glowing so much anymore." I think, no, see the cloud. But I didn't say anything because I'm not there to just argue with individuals. I'm there to make an investigation. But somebody I discussed this with said, now the priest fully agreed with me, so did the bishop. And no disagreement with those people. But some guy said to me, he said, but if you come back at night, you'll see that it's even when the sun's down, it's still glowing. So I came back, and of course it was just shining from the ambient lights of the parking lot and the other church lights. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the next day I was out taking some final photos and some final notes, and this nice church lady came up. She said, "Well, Mr. Skeptic, what have you found?" And so I just told her. She looked me straight in the eye, smiled, and said, "Well, I prefer not to believe that." So you see how much effect I have under these conditions. Next slide. Here I appear to be venerating the holy blood of Christ in Bruges, Belgium. I say appear to be because I stood in the pilgrim line only so I could get a good look at it. In fact, I stood in the pilgrim line twice, paying a modest donation both times. I had money showing it in my hand, and a very rare opportunity to actually see up close the holy blood of Bruges. Whereupon I found it suspiciously red and waxy. If you know about the miraculous liquefying blood in Naples, I have demonstrated that an oil wax emulsion will, if just slightly warm, say from holding it in your hand, it will suddenly miraculously liquefy. So I've made replications of some miracles when I thought that was appropriate, as in the next case. Here I am in Turin, and that casket holds the holy shroud of Jesus. Or not. Now, there have been some 40 true shrouds of Jesus. As skeptics, I'm pretty sure that you will agree with me that at least 39 of those are fake. I'm thinking the number may be as high as 41. But there I am, and there's a picture of the Shroud's image. Again, not a good picture and hard to see, but the face of the Shroud, if you picture it, is a quasi-negative image. And I showed, next slide, this was said to be absolutely impossible, but that's an Italian magazine called me the detective of the impossible. So I like that. I took a bas-relief, in this case Bing Crosby, molded a wet cloth to it, let it dry, rubbed on powdered pigment. It makes a remarkable image like a photographic negative, but it's actually a quasi-negative. And then you reverse it and it makes a lifelike picture. The next slide. This is one of my replications of the Turin Shroud. My friend now in Italy, Luigi Scully, has taken my book on the Shroud, my hypotheses, my techniques, and he's made a full-length, double-image shroud of, that's not a shroud of Nickell, I guess. But Gigi made this. It's really a wonderful accomplishment. Of course, the believers are having none of this. But he said, we were at a science fair in Genoa, and he said that, pointing to me, he said I was the brains, he was only the hands. But in fact, really what he did was much, much more than that. So we can now say, though people will continue to insist that the Shroud of Turin is too remarkable for anyone to do anything with it, that's not true. And we should remember that the earliest mention of the Shroud of Turin is a bishop's report. In the middle of the 14th century, the Shroud first shows up, and then a little later a bishop reports to Pope Clement that the forger had been found and confessed. The radiocarbon dating, let me just ask you, just get your impression here. Would you think, now this is 3 laboratories comparing samples from the Shroud of Turin and then comparing them to known burial cloths like Cleopatra's mummy cloth and so forth. And they were all exactly accurate. All three labs got the exact same results. It was like 3 arrows clustered in a bullseye. Would you imagine they got a date? A, the time of Christ. B, the time of the forger's confession. Or C, the birthday of George Washington. Okay, that's right. You get it right. Okay, next slide. This is John of God, the Brazilian healer, who goes into a trance and communicates with entities. And I went undercover and in disguise. That's not me. No, I'm better looking than that. This is me back here with the really weird eyeglasses and the cane. You had to dress in white. But let me tell you that the entities, the spirits that speak to John of God and tell him all about you and your illness and so forth, had not a clue that I was an undercover agent, that I was misrepresenting myself, that I was a notorious skeptic, that I was not sick at all, and so forth, and that I was there on behalf of National Geographic. They failed to mention those things. Next slide. I think I need to pick up the pace here just a little bit, right? At what, 5 minutes or?
That was 15.
5. Okay, quickly. In the book, I do deal with the miracles of Jesus, and too lengthy to go into here, but basically my thesis is that the miracles of Jesus were originally parables, and those parables have become miracle stories. And you'll see I worked them out, each one. And in the case of the water to wine, for example, the synoptic gospels have the parable of the new wine. It's John's gospel, separate from that, that has the miracle of the wine. And really, it's just the story of the water of Judaism transformed into the new and good wine of Christianity. And you can see that from story after story. Some of the Jesus walking on the water, for example, is it's a resurrection appearance tale of the spirit of Jesus walking on the water. You'll see how I work it out, but these are mostly stories that have been made into miracle tales. I think it's very convincing. Next slide. This is Lillian Burness, a Canadian stigmatist. She has the wounds of Christ, and she did this on regular occasions, so you could go in anticipation. And of course, I'm very eager to see that, she would come out, and I wanted to see these wounds, but you don't see her, like if I showed you right now and all of a sudden, before your very eyes, I start bleeding, I'd be either a good magic trick or something. You'd certainly be impressed. But she comes out and she's already bleeding, and the wounds are not through and through wounds. They're only on the backs of her hands and the tops of her feet, little superficial wounds. Yes, I had met her before. I shook her bloody hand, and I investigated and saw her wounds quite closely. When she hugged a woman in front of me, I almost pulled out my magnifying glass. In fact, I would have if I'd had a few moments more. I probably would have. Superficial wounds, I'm sure, self-inflicted, consistent with that. Next slide. Many wonder workers in India and other places claim to have mystical powers over fire. For example, they do firewalks. Let me just tell you that when I did this, the main secret that I had was when people asked me to pose for a photo, I just kept going. So let me just urge that as a technique to you, and you'll be okay. Do not stroll slowly. You do need to move along there. Next slide. We're just nearly done here. We're just almost momentarily done. And this is the movie The Reaping with Hilary Swank. This movie was based in part on my life's work as a miracle detective. I spoke with a scriptwriter at some length. Time Warner Brothers Pictures was kind enough to bring me down to Louisiana and have me on the set. I met Hilary Swank, and yes, I gave her a magic wooden nickel. And she's a very engaging and clever person. It was a real pleasure to meet her. I just wanted to bring up the next slide because I wanted you to see, just take a look there, and I think you can see why she would be chosen to play me.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good choice. And finally, the last word from our sponsor, and thank you very much.